I am 98 years old. My name is Magnolia Theus.
I did not know I was killing myself. Not slowly, not quietly, the way people say when they mean something gentle. I mean truly, physically, destroying my own body, one bitter thought at a time. I did not know that, not until I was well past 70 years old, and a doctor sat across from me and said words I had never expected to hear. And even then, it took me longer still to understand what those words really meant. My name is Magnolia Theus. I am 98 years old, and I am still here. Not because I ate perfectly, or exercised every morning, or had any kind of special advantage that most people do not have. I am still here, I believe with everything in me, because somewhere in my late 70s, I finally learned how to forgive. Now I want to be careful with you, because what I am about to tell you is not a simple story. It is not the kind that wraps itself up neatly at the end and leaves you feeling that everything has been resolved. Life is not that kind. But I do believe that what happened to me and what I learned from it might sit with you long after this is over, and if it does, then the telling of it will have been worth every word. I was born in 1926 in a small town in Georgia, the third of 7 children. My father worked the land, and my mother kept the house and kept us together. We were not wealthy people. We were not poor in spirit, but we were poor in most other ways. And yet, I remember my childhood with a deep warmth. There was a safety in that house, a kind of love that did not need to say much. My mother would hum while she worked, and that sound, that low, easy hum, it was the sound of being home. I can still hear it if I close my eyes and sit still enough. I married young, as most women did in those days. His name was Ezra Theus. And I want you to understand, before I tell you what came later, that when I married that man, I loved him completely. He was funny in a quiet way. He was good with his hands. He worked hard, and he was proud. And in the early years of our marriage, there was a kind of joy between us that I have never been able to fully describe to another person. It was the joy of building something together, a life, a home, children. We had 4 children, 4 healthy children, who filled our house with noise and need and laughter, and I was happy. For many years, I was genuinely happy. I want you to hold that, because what comes next is easier to understand if you first understand how much I had to lose. It was 1963. I was 37 years old, and our youngest child had just started school, and I remember thinking that perhaps this was the beginning of a new season for Ezra and me, a quieter one, a season where we could turn to each other again, the way we had in the beginning. Instead, that was the year I found out about the other woman. I will not go into every detail, because some things belong only to the people who lived them. But I will say this, it was not a brief thing. It was not a mistake that happened once, in a moment of weakness. It had been going on for years, while I was raising his children and keeping his home and standing beside him in church on Sunday mornings. Years. And when I found out, it was not even from him. He did not have the courage to tell me himself. I found out the way women in those days often found out, through the quiet knowing of another woman. who had her own reasons for telling me. The night I found out I did not cry, that surprised me. I thought I would cry. Instead, I felt something cold move through me, the way cold water moves through a pipe in winter, something that started in my chest and spread outward until I felt it in my hands, in my feet, in my jaw. I sat at the kitchen table for a very long time that night. I don't know how long. The children were asleep. The house was quiet. And I sat there and felt something in me go hard. That hardness, I would carry it for years. I want you to understand that I did not leave Ezra in 1963 in Georgia with 4 children and no income of my own. Leaving was not the simple choice that people today might imagine it to be. I stayed, and Ezra, to his credit, ended it. He came to me eventually, and he said what he needed to say. He wept, he begged, he promised, and I looked at him, and I said the words I knew I was supposed to say. I said, I forgave him, and I believed in that moment that I meant it, but I did not mean it, not truly, not in the way that forgiveness is supposed to work, in the deep places of a person. What I had done was something I suspect many people have done. I had buried it. I had placed that wound in a box, closed the lid, and put the box somewhere in the back of myself, where I did not have to look at it every day. I told myself the matter was settled, and I moved forward with my life, and I kept the house and raised the children, and smiled when I was supposed to smile, and laughed when I was supposed to laugh. But a buried thing does not stay buried. That is something nobody told me when I was young. They told me to be strong. They told me to hold my head up. They told me that time heals. But nobody told me that if you do not actually process a wound, if you do not go into it and feel it and release it, it will find its own way out. And it will not be gentle about it. For the next 15 years, from my early 30s into my late 40s, I lived with a kind of low, constant anger that I had no name for. It was not hot anger. I was not a woman who raged. I was a woman who held. I held my feelings down the way you hold the lid on a pot that is starting to boil. And the effort of that holding, the daily, hourly effort of it, was costing me something I could not yet see. I was short with my children more than I wanted to be. I was cold with Ezra in ways that had nothing to do with the moment and everything to do with the box in the back of myself that I never opened. I did not sleep well. I had headaches that would come on without warning and stay for days. My shoulders were always tense. I was tired in a way that rest did not fix, and I assumed, as most people do, that this was simply what life was, that this was what getting older felt like. And then Ezra got sick. In 1978, Ezra was diagnosed with a serious illness, and within 18 months, he was gone. And here's the thing I was not prepared for. Here's the thing that undid everything I thought I had settled within myself. When Ezra died, I did not only grieve the man I had loved, I grieved the conversation we never had. I grieved the full and honest reckoning that we never allowed ourselves to have. I grieved the years I had spent in quiet anger instead of in actual healing. And now, there was no one left to forgive. He was gone, and the box in the back of myself was still closed. And now, it would never be open between us. The grief of his death, combined with the unresolved grief of the betrayal, created something in me that I can only describe as a kind of internal storm. On the outside, I was composed. I was the steady one. I was the matriarch. I wore black and accepted condolences and made sure the grandchildren were fed. But inside, something was tearing, and my body, as bodies do, began to keep the score. By the time I was 69 years old, I had high blood pressure. I had a heart condition that required medication. I had chronic back pain that had moved in and made itself comfortable. I was overweight in a way that had crept on slowly over years, and I was exhausted all the time. Not the normal exhaustion of an older woman, but a heavy, weighted exhaustion that made simple things feel enormous. Getting out of bed in the morning felt like climbing a hill. My doctor at the time was a young woman, no older than my daughter, Dr. Simone Arsenault. And I tell you her name because she deserves to be remembered in this story. She was the kind of doctor who still looked at you when you talked, who still asked the questions that had nothing to do with the blood work. And one afternoon, she sat across from me in that small office, and she asked me something that nobody had asked me in years. She said, "Miss Magnolia, is there anything in your life that is weighing on you emotionally? Anything that you have been carrying for a long time?" I almost laughed. I almost said, "Doctor, I am 69 years old. I've been carrying things my whole life." But something about the way she asked it, something about the directness and the genuine care behind it, stopped me. And instead of deflecting, I sat there in that chair and I began to cry. Not a little. I wept in that office in a way that I had not wept since I was a very young woman. I wept for Ezra and for what he did, and for what I never said, and for the years of quiet hardness, and the headaches, and the sleeplessness, and the tiredness that never went away. I wept for a very long time, and when I was done, Dr. Arsenault handed me a tissue, and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I've never forgotten. She said, "What you just described to me, the long-term stress, the chronic tension, the feeling of holding something down for years that has a physical cost. The research on this is very clear. Chronic unresolved anger and grief raise your cortisol levels. They keep your nervous system in a state of low-grade emergency. Over time, that damages your heart, your immune system, your blood pressure, your sleep, your weight. The body does not separate the emotional from the physical." And then she leaned forward just slightly, and she said, "You have been fighting a war inside yourself for 30 years. And I need you to consider that some of your health problems may not come from what you ate or how much you exercised. They may come from what you have been carrying." Now let me tell you what I learned in the years that followed that conversation, because Dr. Arsenault was right, and the science behind what she said is something I think every person deserves to understand. Not because I want this to feel like a lecture. It is not a lecture. It is something I wish someone had told me when I was 30 years old, but because understanding it helped me finally do what I could not bring myself to do for 3 decades. When you hold on to unresolved anger or grief or resentment, your body treats that emotional state the same way it would treat a physical threat. Your brain activates what scientists call the stress response. Your body releases a hormone called cortisol. Now, cortisol, in small amounts, for short periods, is not a bad thing. It is what helps you respond to a real danger. It sharpens your focus. It gives you energy in a crisis. God designed that system for a reason. But here is the problem. When the stress is not a tiger chasing you, when the stress is a wound you're carrying silently, day after day, year after year, the cortisol does not turn off. It stays elevated, and elevated cortisol over long periods of time does measurable damage to the body. It raises blood pressure, it hardens the arteries, it disrupts your sleep. At the cellular level, it suppresses your immune system, which is why chronically stressed people get sick more often and heal more slowly. It promotes inflammation throughout the body, and inflammation, as we now know, is connected to almost every major disease of aging: heart disease, diabetes, certain cancers. Researchers who have spent years studying the connection between emotional state and physical health in older adults have found this consistently. People who carry long-term unresolved resentment or grief show measurably worse cardiovascular health, measurably shorter telomeres. Now, telomeres are the little protective caps on the end of your chromosomes. They determine how quickly your cells age. When they shorten too fast, you age faster. Stress shortens them. And the research shows measurably higher rates of inflammatory markers in the blood in people who are carrying unresolved pain. In plain language, what that means is this: holding a grudge, carrying unresolved pain, living in a state of chronic, low-grade anger. It ages you faster. It is not a metaphor. It is biology. Your cells are affected. Your heart is affected. Your blood is affected. And on the other side of that, the research on forgiveness is equally striking. Studies following adults over many years have found that those who practice genuine forgiveness, not the buried kind, not the performative kind, but actual, worked through forgiveness, had significantly lower blood pressure, lower rates of depression and anxiety, stronger immune function, and, in many measures, longer lives. Research out of Stanford found that the physical act of releasing resentment, of truly letting go, produced measurable decreases in stress hormones within weeks of the practice. I did not know any of this in 1978 when Ezra died. I did not know it in 1963 when the wound was first made. But when Dr. Arsenault explained it to me at 69, sitting in that small office, something shifted in me. Not immediately, not all at once, but something shifted. Because for the first time, the reason to forgive was not an abstract moral obligation. It was not because Ezra deserved it, or because it was the right thing to do. The reason to forgive was simply because I wanted to live, because I was 69 years old, and I still had grandchildren who called me on the telephone, and Sunday mornings coming in through the window, and the smell of sweet tea in the afternoon. And I was not done yet. I was not ready to let a man who had been dead for 15 years continue to take years from my life. The process of forgiving Ezra took me several years. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think one of the most harmful things we tell people about forgiveness is that it is a moment, a decision you make once on a Tuesday afternoon, and then you are done. It is not. It is a practice. It is a daily, sometimes hourly, choice, especially in the beginning. It is returning again and again to the same wound and choosing each time not to pick it back up and carry it. I started working with a counselor, a quiet woman named Mrs. Delphine, who had an office above a pharmacy and who smelled always of lavender. I saw her for 3 years. In those sessions, I did something I had not done in 30 years. I opened the box, I took everything out, and I looked at it, all of it. The specific memories I had sealed away, the exact shape of the betrayal, the years of silence, the things I never said to Ezra before he died, the grief I had never fully allowed myself to feel. I looked at all of it, and I sat with it, and I wept more tears over those 3 years than I had wept in the 30 years before them combined.